Hey everybody, this is Josh and welcome to Consume the Canon. This week, we are doing Solo Block, all of the content associated with Solo, a Star Wars story that was released in and around that time period. So it's all the stuff that's related to the film, as well as the content related to Beckett and Lando, and a couple other pieces as well. I am wearing my special Star Han Solo shirt, tribute to Woody Guthrie. So let's just jump right in, okay? So the first item that we get in the Solo block is the young adult novel Most Wanted. So Most Wanted takes place shortly before the events of Solo, a Star Wars story, and it tells about the beginnings of the friendship of Han Solo and Kira. So at the time, both of them are parts of Lady Proxima's gang on Corellia, but they're not really friends right now. They're more adversaries. Each one of them is competing to see who's going to be the top lieutenant for Lady Proxima. And so at the beginning, we see that kind of tension, and both of them get sent off on a mission by Lady Proxima. Well, it turns out that they are basically playing two sides of the same mission. Kira is going to put in a bid on a little data cube. She's there with representatives from a few other groups, one of them being the Caldana Syndicate, and the other being the droid Gotra. So we've seen a little bit from the droid Gotra, I don't remember which one it is. We saw some mention of them in some earlier comics and a few earlier pieces of material. This is probably the first real prominent time that we've seen the droid Gotra show up. And they're basically a gang of droids who have decided they were left over from the Clone Wars and they decided they want to, be independent. Well, then Han Solo is on the other side, and he is actually where the handoff is going to happen for this data cube. Spoiler alert, I thought the whole time the little data cube they kept talking about was going to end up being his dice, his lucky dice. They don't. So don't wait for that to happen. The other weird part about this, though, is that his dice actually aren't mentioned at all in this story. So it almost feels like the dice he didn't have yet. And he gets them sometime between Most Wanted and the beginning of Solo's Star Wars story. But that's just a guess. Anyway, things don't go well. They kind of go completely sideways. And Han and Kira have to team up with another person in the gang, a Rodian who is tech savvy, who helps them kind of get through this craziness. Because all the gangs, of course, when things go sideways, they all want to kill Kira and Han. By the end, Kira and Han are much closer. We get the sense that there's definitely a burgeoning relationship here. Kira actually gets the first girl kind of lieutenant position by the end. And that's actually the place that she is in at the beginning of Solo, a Star Wars story. Overall, the novel is good. It's definitely very young adult. It's very YA, but in a very good way. It's very entertaining. But besides the kind of information that we get about Kira and Han Solo, we don't really get a lot about Solo's character. We get a ton about Kira, but not as much about Han Solo as I would have liked. So next up is Lando's Luck. This is a chapter book, which is part of the Flight of the Falcon series. And this is another story where Bettine Nazal is at Black Spire, and she's trying to track down where the Millennium Falcon is, and she meets a woman who says that she can tell her a story about the Falcon, and her story is about when this woman was a young princess, and she interacted with Lando and L337 and flew around on the Millennium Falcon and had a fun adventure. This is actually a really, really fun read. Chapter books are something that could very easily be overlooked by folks who are looking to read content about Star Wars, but the chapter books for Star Wars are really great, basically front to back. All of them have been super entertaining. Lando's Luck is another example of that. It is a very Lando Calrissian story. All the things he does and the things he says, it feels very on point as far as the character is concerned. It gives us more about L3 and that relationship there. It gives us more of that timeline of the Millennium Falcon. And of course, it's that ongoing Flight of the Falcon series, which has been pretty cool so far. We'll talk about some of the other pieces references that are later in later episodes. But Lando's Luck, fun chapter book. Pick it up, read it. It's a super easy read, and it's definitely a whole heck of a lot of fun. After Lando's Luck is the Beckett one-shot. This tells 3 very quick stories about Beckett and his crew and some of the crazy adventures they get into. The stories are fine. There's not really a ton there. There's a little bit about Infus Nest and kind of how they've had an adversarial relationship, but otherwise, there's no real gaps filled here. It just gives us a little bit more about Beckett before we see him in Solo: A Star Wars Story. It's pretty skippable, but if you're a completionist, pick it up and give it a look. Next up is the big one, Solo: A Star Wars Story, the film itself. And I'm going to say right up front, I absolutely loved this movie. I loved it the first time I saw it, the second time I saw it, the third time I saw it. I love Solo because it is so much fun. It is one of the funnest Star Wars movies, and that's something that Star Wars, I think, is really lacking when you look at the entire canon in general. But I think the Solo block itself does a fantastic job of reminding us Star Wars is fun. I'm not going to talk about the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, you should go see the movie. I mean, it's essential viewing. But you have to go into it thinking about old, Hollywood serials and old kind of swashbuckler movies. I mean, that's what this movie's supposed to be. I thought Alden Ehrenreich did a great job as Han Solo. All of the other characters are fantastic. The L3 melding with the Millennium Falcon is even more impactful once you've read the content before and specifically the extended edition of the novel after. Everything is great. So I really love Solo. I think you have to go back and give it another shot if you're one of the folks who didn't really like it the first time. Go in, pop some popcorn, crack a beer, and watch Han Solo again because it is such a fun cinematic experience. So the companion to the movie is the Solo: A Star Wars Story extended edition novel. And I actually like this more than the movie. I love the movie, but the novel is so great. Not only does it give more context to the scenes that we're already familiar with, and it gives more depth to all the characters that are involved in those scenes, which a novel adaptation needs to do, but it gives us additional scenes which are really integral to telling the character stories of these characters. Specifically, it gives us a whole lot more about L3 melding with the Millennium Falcon. It gives us more about Lando and L3's relationship. It gives us more about Han Solo and Chewbacca. It gives us more everything. There's only one scene in it which feels extraneous, and that's a scene where Chewbacca takes a shower on the Millennium Falcon and he uses all of Lando's expensive shampoos. But besides that, every other additional scene it feels essential. I highly recommend you go out and read the book. If you don't like the movie and you don't want to watch the movie again, go out and give the book a chance because I think the additional stuff adds the kind of depth that maybe some people were looking for, but they didn't get from the film on its first viewing. Another companion piece to Solo: A Star Wars Story is the junior novel. So this is basically the chapter book version of Solo: A Star Wars Story. It's a very simplified story. It's a good representation of Solo. However, I would recommend it for completionists because it actually answers a ton of questions about that big monster which is in the maw. It names it Asuma Verminoth. It also explains why it was so willing to dive into a singularity. Turns out it was in love with the singularity. And it explains that scene, that whole sequence, in a way which is simple but still enjoyable. I really liked it. It's good. I would recommend it highly for kids who are in that kind of phase of reading. And it's a decent representation of the Solo story in general. There's a block of 3 young reader books right here, too. There is the Star Wars read-along storybook and CD. There is the Star Wars Golden Book for Solo, and then there is the Train Heist, which is a read-along, but it's specific to the train heist portion of the movie. These are actually the most lacking part of Solo Block. Normally, the Golden books are pretty solid, but this one's fine. It doesn't really do a ton. If you had to pick one of the three, I would still go with the Golden Book. But they're okay. I wouldn't really highly recommend them as far as youth reader content is concerned. But like I said, go with the Golden Book if you're not really sure. We're not fully through the Solo adaptation in comics. We've gotten through the first 6 issues at this point, but they've been faithful to the film. I think one of the problems that people have had with the comic adaptations for Star Wars movies is that they're really just a replication of what we saw on screen. Solo is still that. There's a few additional bits and bobs here and there, but it doesn't really give us a ton to go with. The one thing I am going to do, though, is I'm actually going to flip some things around here. Be mindful that the Solo adaptation is broken up into a number of issues. The first issue is basically everything that happens right before he enters the Imperial Navy, and then a little bit that happens after. However, the series after the Solo adaptation is Imperial Cadet, which is a 5-issue run, which takes place for all intents and purposes between issue 1 and issue 2 of the Solo adaptation. So, Solo adaptation, good. It's not really essential. The art's great and the writing, is essentially just the movie, but the art and the layout is fantastic. Same thing can be said for Imperial Cadet. The art and the layout in Imperial Cadet is top-notch. It is absolutely stellar. The story itself is well written. However, again, it doesn't really give us a ton of new stuff about Han Solo. It gives us historical information. It gives us facts, but it doesn't give us a lot about his character. He's already this brash, arrogant, scoundrel with a heart of gold. We've already seen that in Most Wanted. We've seen it in the comics. We see it in the film. We don't get a lot about how he got to this point. We know he doesn't really have any parents. We know that his life has been tough, but how did he become Han Solo? In all this content, he already is Han Solo, and it's kind of, I wish there was more. But Imperial Cadet is good. It's entertaining. It's a fun story about how Han Solo kind of navigates his way through the Imperial Academy, and essentially shows he just wants to be a pilot, and he's willing to do anything, including beating everyone in every sort of trial that the Imperial Academy can throw at him to make sure he becomes a pilot eventually. So it shows us that. It shows us how much he really wants to be a pilot, but that's kind of something we already knew. So it's good, but, not essential. So somewhere mixed in here, it is definitely after the end of Most Wanted. Probably before, though, it's probably in the break between when Han Solo goes into the Imperial Academy and the next block, like the train heist portion of Solo, a Star Wars story, which is the Forces of Destiny story called Triple Cross. So this is a story about Hondo Ohnaka and IG-88 teaming up to capture Kira for her bounty. And she actually flips it around on them. They get captured by her, and she's going to turn them in for their bounty. It's pretty silly. But of course, you know me, anything that has Hondo in it, I consider to be, a key portion of Star Wars canon. So, watch it. It's 2 minutes long, But yeah, it's got Hondo, it's got IG-88, it's got Kira being kind of saucy and the street urchin kind of brilliant mind that she is. So yeah, Triple Cross, Forces of Destiny, spend the 3 minutes and watch it. Yeah, it's very good. And then last up in Solo Block is Lando Double or Nothing. So Lando Double or Nothing takes place, again, between the 13 BBY, the beginning part of Solo, and the 10 BBY after the train heist. And it's essentially a story about Lando Calrissian and L3 going on an adventure, and it's one of those reminders that Lando Calrissian is a scoundrel first, but he is also willing to help out people who are in trouble. So it's a 5-issue series about Lando trying to, help a group fight against the Empire. The story itself is fine. Again, whoever's writing for Lando is writing his voice perfectly. All of the dialogue with Lando Calrissian feels completely spot on. His interactions with L3 are worth the price of admission on their own. Their relationship is something that I would love to see more of, and I'm just really afraid we're not going to. But this story, this 5-issue arc, which is entertaining, if you can pick it up, on the cheap or get it from the library, that's what I did. I would definitely pick it up and read it. It's fun. It's a good read. And the story ends immediately before Kira and Solo meet up with Lando, when he's playing Sabacc. So it explains how Lando got to where he is. It explains how, the Millennium Falcon got there. It puts a lot of pieces together that lead right into his interactions with Kira and Solo. So it's fun. It fills in some gaps, and it ties kind of all of their storylines all together with Solo: A Star Wars Story. So that's it. That's Solo Block. I want you guys to go back and watch Solo again. Solo is such a fun movie. Read all the content around it. If you have to read something, read the extended novel. The extra scenes give so much more color, so much more depth to the characters. But I want you guys to go back out and read it again. And then I also want you guys to like and share and subscribe and tell your friends. I'm also on Instagram at Consume the Canon and on Twitter at Consume the Canon. So please go check those out. And I will see you guys next time on Consume the Canon.